Today on this episode of the Brain Surgeon's Take, we will be discussing cognitive dominance, mastering stress and achieving success, with board-certified neurosurgeon, author, and West Point speaker, Dr. Mark McLaughlin. Life is full of challenges, regardless of who you are or what your profession is. Learn about techniques for handling adversity and maintaining wellness in order to reach peak performance. Much more on this podcast episode. Welcome back, everyone. Here's my take on Dr. Mark McLaughlin. He understands the rigors of life. No matter who you are and what you do, it is important to handle adversity and grow from each experience. As background, Mark is incredibly accomplished, both academically as a board-certified neurosurgeon and athletically as a Division I Hall of Fame wrestler. Through each of these journeys, Mark has encountered multiple failures and losses. But these setbacks are exactly what make Mark incredibly successful, as he views them as learning opportunities and chances to improve. I loved doing this interview, especially talking to Mark about how mentally grueling neurosurgery is and what his techniques are for dealing with our job rigors. Complications are part of medicine, but it does not change the fact that each complication takes an emotional toll. If life were easy, everyone would achieve their goals. But since life is difficult, success is largely defined by the ability to overcome obstacles. Listen up as we discuss cognitive dominance, mastering stress, and achieving success. Check it out. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, Rick.
Absolutely. I read your book, Cognitive Dominance, and I'm excited to talk to you about it today. I think it's something that we all deal with, even though we may not have heard the term cognitive dominance, but dealing with fear, trepidation, all the stuff that everyone deals with in life, whether you like it or not. And I think your book was very insightful. So look forward to talking to you.
Thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Let's start with your background, which is so interesting. Both a Division I Hall of Fame college wrestler and a neurosurgeon. Tell us how you got into neurosurgery to begin with.
Sure. I went to medical school at Medical College of Virginia, and early on in our rotations, we were exposed to the neurosurgery team. And, it was a very strong program at MCV back then. Now it's called VCU. And I got involved in a neuroanatomy lab with John Pavlishak, who's one of the world's leading traumatologists. And so that was really the impetus for me to get interested in neurosurgery. He was an amazing teacher, and the team there was great. And it was a lot like wrestling. It was intense, it was personal, it was grueling. It was right up the same alley. So I just found it a natural progression for me.
Now, you just mentioned something that I fully believe in. I think that there's a lot of parallels between athletics and surgery, and let alone neurosurgery. I think all the stuff you mentioned, but go into it a little bit more. Similarities between being a surgeon, something where there's muscle memory, technique, repetition, and high-level athletics like you've done.
Sure. I think there are similarities, and there are also some really important differences that I think I wish I had learned as a younger person. But certainly the similarities are the discipline of it, the rigor of doing something over and over and over again to get better at something. And again, as you point out, the muscle memory. I think the intensity of it is absolutely the same. I mean, we go to a locker room, we put on a uniform, we go into a hallowed ground, and we have to perform. That's athletics and that's surgery. I mean, it's exactly the same. So the discipline, the performance aspect of it, the striving for excellence, 100% all part of athletics. One of the things I think is a little bit different is, athletics, and particularly wrestling, it's a win-lose, zero-sum game. And in wrestling, you have to impose your will on somebody else. I mean, you need to take them down and put an armbar on them and turn them on their back, and they don't want to do that. And that's a mentality that I've learned over the years is something you need to check at the door when you get into medicine, and it's something you need to check in the door when you come home at night. You can't impose your will on people, and it's not a win-lose situation. So it's important to recognize that competitiveness that we learn as athletes It doesn't work in relationships. It doesn't work in business dealings either. If you construct a business deal where you're the winner and they're the loser, that's not a deal that's going to last. And certainly in relationships, that's just not something. So it helps you, but it's a hat that you need to be able to take off and put aside at times in your life.
I totally agree, and I think that uh, to the end that you're talking about similarities, as a program director, when people apply, I'm definitely partial towards the athletes. I doesn't mean that someone can be terrible on paper and we take them just because they're an athlete, but I think that from what I've seen are people like yourself who compete at a high level of team sports, understand discipline, sacrifice, goal oriented, getting to a certain point, and work ethic. And I think that that goes a long way when it comes to neurosurgery residency. Now, tell us about your book, Cognitive Dominance. What was your impetus to write that book midway through your career?
Sure. And I would warn anyone, if you're thinking about writing a book, first of all, you should do it. But second, you need to realize it's a huge, huge commitment. It took me 4 years to write that book. And that was with the help of a very experienced editor, too. But it came about because I was invited to speak up at West Point at the Center for Enhanced Performance, which was initially a fledgling organization that grew into a real powerhouse at West Point, where the cadets and the athletes go and they analyze their performance and they're coached with by sports psychologists. So I had a chance to give a talk on elite performance up there. And as I prepared my talk for that the first time and then subsequently over the years, I just wanted them to kind of get into my mind, to kind of feel like what and hear what I was thinking during emergencies, during these kinds of decisions that we have to make. One of the things I talk about in the book is as a neurosurgeon, I'm 25 years into it now. We probably make 30, 40, 50,000 life and death decisions in our career. Those are decisions to operate. Those are decisions to not operate. Those are decisions to count how to counsel a family. All those decisions, they they install like a methodology in your mind that I think is worth sharing, and I think it's something that is transferable to life. So as I started telling these stories up at West Point, I started realizing, wow, I think I can stitch these together into an overall concept. And then while I was up there, and that's the greatest thing about teaching is you learn while you're teaching. One of the cadets said, this sounds something like cognitive dominance. And I said, what's cognitive dominance? And the cadet said, well, that's enhanced situational awareness that facilitates rapid and accurate decision making under stressful conditions with limited decision making time. I was like, wow, that's a mouthful. Where can I get more of that? So once he said that, I thought, man, that's the whole concept. That's the bundle around what the thought process is that you learn as a neurosurgeon over your years. And so it was a great way of tying the whole package together.
Now, you just mentioned cognitive dominance, which I learned after reading your book, making critical decisions in a tight situation where you don't have time to really go over everything, that have important consequences. And I think that's what neurosurgeons do on a daily basis, as well as anyone in a high level leadership position. What are the three requirements for cognitive dominance?
Great question. The first thing is, and I know we're going to talk more about this, is I believe it's the elimination of fear, the absolute elimination of fear. And I know we've been trained and brought up by our parents and taught by our attendings, to be afraid of things. But I think it's corrosive and I think it interferes with our performance. And we'll put that aside for right now. But that's, I think, a topic I'd really love to talk more about. The second thing is really humility. And I define humility, and it's not my definition. I learned this from one of my coaches. Is humility is knowing when to be the teacher and knowing when to be the student. If you can discern those two moments when they're presented to you, you will not have an impediment to learning and performing. And then lastly, I think it's non-judgmentalness. And the distinction I like to make here is that There's a difference between judgment and judgmentalness. Judgment is, I shouldn't cross the street right now because it's dangerous. There's a lot of traffic. Judgment is, do I need to take this person to the operating room or not right now and observe them and get another scan in a few hours? Those things are very important. They're critical. Judgmentalness is when we start looking down our nose at someone because we think they've done a shoddy job. Or judgmentalness is when we start thinking we are superior to someone, or someone is judging us while we're performing. Those those things are that is really the definition of that, is when we when our affinity, respect, love, admiration is diminished or enhanced by how we look at a situation. And that's something that I think if you can avoid, or that you can minimize and be aware of, you're going to perform better. So those are the three elements of cognitive dominance: eliminating fear, humility, and watching out, being aware of judgmentalness, which not only hinders your opinion of others, but it hinders your opinion of yourself. And that's where you get into trouble.
Now you mentioned fear. It's a very powerful emotion. Too little makes you dangerous as a surgeon. Obviously, if you have no fear and you're going into someone's brain, it obviously makes you dangerous. Too much makes you paralyzed and you can't perform at the highest level. In your opinion, what's the appropriate level of fear when you're confronting any critical task?
I love this question, and it's a challenging answer for me in one way, and it's a simple answer in another way. The we call I'm going to say something that's going to be a little counterintuitive, and it may take some time to shell out a little bit, but in my paradigm, fear is not an emotion. Fear is a thought. Fear is a thought, and it evokes an emotion. So when I give my talks up at West Point, I bring this little handy button, and I say, if this is a magical button, and you could push it, and once you pushed it, you had no thought at all of what the future was going to be. You eliminated thinking about the future, and you were only in the present moment. Would you push that button? And before you answer, I would say this is what I would do. I would push that button, because fear to me is a thought about an event in the future that if it happens, I'm going to feel something I don't want to feel. I'm going to feel sadness. I'm going to feel anger. I'm going to feel frustration. I'm going to feel inadequacy. If I do something wrong in the surgery, maybe I'm going to feel inferior. I'm going to feel like I hurt somebody. I'm going to feel sad. I'm going to feel all those things. But to me, it's a thought that takes you out of the present moment. And so um, I would posit that no amount of fear whatsoever it adds to your performance, or even to a first year resident's performance. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't be prudent. I'm not saying you shouldn't be aware. I'm not saying you shouldn't be cognizant of that, anterior communicating artery on the back of that meningioma that you need to be aware of very carefully, and you're the most tired at the end of the surgery and you're getting to the back of that tumor. Yes, you need to be aware. And then obviously, it's also particularly for residents, and you're in this teaching position, it's particularly aware for residents to recognize that humility component. Where am I on this learning curve, and when have I reached my boundary? But I wouldn't call that fear. I would call that prudence, to say, Dr. K, I'm feeling nervous here. I feel like I've gotten to the level. And then it's your job to say, no, I know you can go more. I know your skills. Trust me. I know you. I've done this. You can go farther. Push yourself. But it's that dialogue, and I just don't think fear helps in that scenario. And I could just speak from my own personal experiences as I've gone along. When I was a younger surgeon, and I would get, I'd be doing a spine operation, and I'd get that dural tear, and I'd be like, oh gosh, oh my goodness, I hurt this person. Maybe I hurt this person. Their outcome's not going to be as good. Um, it would completely get in the way of doing what needed to get done, and that is define the bony anatomy, surround the area, isolate the area where it's torn, and sew it back up. And the more I got back into that moment of do what needs to get done next, get it done, the more I performed. And then afterwards, I this is the business we've chosen. We've chosen a business that has high stakes, that has bad outcomes, and all we can do is bring ourselves to the present moment. So I know that's a challenging concept, but I'd like to throw it out there as a new paradigm of teaching.
I mean, I do agree in that sense, and I kind of want to get into your mindset of a big part of anyone at a high level is performing your best when the stakes are highest, whether it's in the Super Bowl, the World Series, neurosurgery, whatever it's going to be. What do you feel are the qualities that allow someone to perform their best under pressure?
I think the qualities are following the rules of what you've learned. So we've been taught a set of rules as neurosurgeons. Dr. Janetta, one of the first lessons he ever taught me was never cut what you can't see. Every time you close that micro scissors, you better damn well know what's between those two blades. Never cut what you can't see. When in doubt, leave a drain. If you're struggling with an operation, get more exposure. All of these rules that we've learned. Never worry about a patient alone. Gail Rousseau taught me that one as a medical student. Those are such great lessons to focus on. And it's when I'm coaching my youth wrestling kids. They may be wrestling somebody who's better than, bigger than them, stronger than them, older than them. Get the wrist control. Focus on the tie-ups. Hit your moves. So it's really focusing on the basics, all of the training that you've had, and being in the present moment. So those are really the important things I think when tackling a task. And then the other thing we point out is that there's no such thing as a big operation or a small operation. There's just an operation. And that's the most important moment right there when you're there. And Derek Jeter talked about this. I loved your episode with Bucky Dent. It was great. Derek Jeter talked about this. There's no such thing as a routine game. There's no such thing as an exhibition game. It is a game, and you are playing it to the best of your ability at all times. So routine all the time. It's something that needs to be accomplished. Focus on the present moment. Stick to your rules. Follow your rules. Remain present.
Now, many people simply can't do that. And like you were saying, we make dozens of thousands of critical life and death decisions during our careers. Why can some people simply not handle that responsibility? Decision making, judgment, uh, peak performance. How come some people fall short?
Well, I think it's a skill set, and I think it's something that needs to be learned and emulated. Centering yourself around an environment of experts and excellence is really important. That's one of the greatest things I loved about nursery, just being around really smart people. Um, I think it can be learned. I think it needs to be coaxed out of people. I still struggle with it. I mean, every, I experience fear all the time. And what I need to do is outthink it. I need to say, okay, that's a signal. That's a basic signal that I've gotten from my amygdala and my prehistoric brain. That's a signal of some meaning. Let's pay attention to that. Let's unpack it and let's break it down. I talk about in my book. One day I was doing an occipital metastasis back near the torcula, and probably something you do every day, and it's a routine operation. But for a community neurosurgeon years ago in my career, it's a bigger, it's a significant case that you're doing. It's not one you do every day. And on that day, a number of things had kind of worried me. It was later in the day. I wasn't going to have my team. I was pretty tired from a long week. And then I got a call that my father had AML, and he had just gotten the diagnosis, and he had advanced disease. And I thought, oh my gosh, I got to cancel this surgery. I mean, there's no way I can do this surgery with this on my mind. Again, I was thinking about the future. I was thinking about having some kind of surgical mishap because my mind wasn't in the game, and I didn't want to feel that feeling that I was anticipating. But as I walked in, and as I walked towards this guy, this patient whose family was waiting for me to do the surgery, I realized that I was going to dedicate that operation to my father. I was going to dedicate that. And I was going to do it in his honor. And I turned that whole thing around into making it a monument for my love of my father and for the love of my patient and for the love of neurosurgery. So it's challenging. It's challenging to face those things and figure something out, but it's doable. And it really comes down to, going back to what's your purpose. And I think as doctors, we're servants. We're servants first. And if you focus on that, all the headaches of the EMR and the delays in paperwork and the bureaucracy, it gets put in its place. And you go back to saying, I'm a servant. I'm here for this guy. He needs me right now. I'll go talk to my dad later. And guess what? I'm going to tell him that I just dedicated an operation to him. You know?
So it's kind of turning it around. And I think you talk about stress a lot in your book, and that's obviously a very stressful situation you just talked about. But stress is largely self-created, right? It's you're basically putting a lot of these stressful instances on yourself. It's how we perceive the world. In your opinion, what's the best way to handle stress and focus when it matters most, not just in neurosurgery, but in any career? Because stress exists for everyone.
Yes. So I'm going to split the stress definition into two things. Like stress on bones is good, it keeps the bones strong. Stress on your heart, it keeps your heart strong. And stress on your muscles helps you be able to locomote and be able to function better. And that's the stress that's good. When we're talking about stress, I think we're talking about low level anxiety. And I think it falls on the spectrum of fear. I think it falls on the low level end of anxiety about something. And almost always it's someone's judgment of us. Are they going to think about us as a good surgeon if we have a complication? Are the OR nurses or the residents or the people around me going to think I've made a poor decision? It's all part of that judgmentalness treadmill that you don't have to jump on. You just don't have to jump on that treadmill. You just have to focus on who you are, what needs to get done, and take care of it. Get into action. A lot of movement. As an athlete still in the OR, I don't know if you find this, but when I do get that little jitter or I hear a little discursive thought about something going wrong, I'm moving my arms, I'm moving around a little bit, I'm listening to the music. I got to have a little bit of that motion that gets me back into things. And then I start teaching. Here's where I see this. Here's why I see. Sometimes Sanjay Gupta called it narrating the room. He narrates the room when he has stress. I narrate the room. Here's the film. Here's the tumor. Here's where we're going. And that gets you back into the mode. So there are these distractors that can bring that stress in, and you need to figure out ways to dismantle it. And that's something I talk about with the cadets. Life interferes. You get a cold and you got the sniffles and a runny nose, and you're trying to perform on an exam, or you've got an important business meeting and you still got to function. Well, we got to triangulate around that and be focused on the moment.
Yeah, if you can't deal with stress, it's going to be hard to be successful in any profession in life because no matter what it is, you're always going to have external forces that worry you and lead to stress. And like you said, I think a certain amount of stress is healthy. You need to realize what you're doing is important and you need to have your A game. That's a certain kind of stress, but you're right. You can't let it paralyze you and you can't let it monopolize your life. Speaking of ways to deal with stress, peak performance, longevity, stamina, a lot of that is with lifestyle. And I'm a big fan of this. And I assume you are as well as a former D1 athlete. But discuss how important a healthy lifestyle is to achieving peak performance in life. And by that, I mean diet, exercise, sleep.
Absolutely critical. You need to take care of yourself. What you put in is what you get out. I find that exercise also helps me process emotions better. And because one of the things we tend to do, again, another habit we fall into is to avoid our feelings. You mentioned about, complications. We talked about complications a little bit. When we have those complications, the key thing is to feel them and not avoid them, not anesthetize ourselves with medications or alcohol or tobacco or distraction. It really is to feel them and to go through them and get close to them. And so, exercise I found is a great way to get through my feelings, to really experience them. Um, Diet is something that I'm still working on. Continue to struggle with that because I love sweets, and I love a great Italian meal. I'm half Italian, so I love a great Italian meal and a good loaf of semolina bread. But it is important to focus on that, especially as we get older. You get away with stuff as a resident in your 30s to have two hot dogs when you're on call, but can't get away with that in your 50s. And as you said, sleep, and that's something that again was ingrained in us inappropriately, improperly early on, that you don't need sleep and you need to be able to function. I will say though, when you're truly alive and when you're really doing things consistent with your purpose, the requirement for sleep goes way down. It goes way down. I'm sure you experience this in the OR. Time just flies by and you come out and you're not tired. You're energized because you fulfilled your purpose. And, that's that burning torch that we want to pass on. So I do think that sometimes if you're feeling tired or exhausted, it's probably because you're having a little cognitive dissonance about something. You've got something that's not sitting right in your mind, and ask yourself, what is going on? What's nagging at me that needs to be addressed? Because I do think your energy levels, they soar when you're doing your purpose.
Now, you mentioned complications. I definitely want to get your perspective on this because complications are without a doubt the worst part of medicine, and particularly in neurosurgery, they are catastrophic, right? It's different in other fields of medicine. Not that any complication is good, but in neurosurgery, when there's a complication, they can't see, they can't talk, they can't move, they're dead. So they are particularly catastrophic, and you, as the surgeon, are the one who takes responsibility. Um, and I've been doing this now for over a decade. It doesn't get easier. In fact, I think it gets harder. Uh, how do you deal emotionally with a complication?
I love talking about this, and I think the thing that hurts the most, the saddest thing, is that you induce suffering in someone else. You induce suffering in that patient and in that family, and it's very sad. And I can tell you what I did in the past is I avoided it. I talk about that young Anthony who I took care of, who had a bad outcome. He had complications and he had a bad outcome. I don't know if anything was done improperly, but I do know that he had complications that I blame myself for. And I avoided it. I ran away from it and I anesthetized myself, and it just got worse. It just kept getting worse. So I would say feeling it, acknowledging it, verbalizing it, sharing it with others, which is something that we don't do, is really, really important to get through these complications. One thing I do ask myself, which has helped me, is I ask myself the question: if 100 neurosurgeons watched what you were doing during that surgery, would they have done anything different? And if my answer is no, I say to myself, then that's the business you've chosen, and that's what you need to appreciate and move on. I do think that if there is something that could have been done differently, it's important to understand that saying to yourself, I should have known better, saying to yourself, I could have done better, is a worthless statement. It doesn't do any good. It's just self-help masquerade. It's guilt, self masquerading as self-help, and beating yourself up. Guilt is just anger turned upon yourself, and it doesn't help. It's not worth doing, and it's an obvious statement. Everything that we know today, you would have done something differently in the past because you would have known a better way, a quicker way, an easier way. So it's to me, it's a useless statement that I've tried to abandon. I have abandoned it. But asking yourself what was workable and what wasn't workable, how can we improve? Those are constructive questions that I think are really important. Um, but I think the main lesson is leaning into it. Lean into it, not away from it. When I reached out to Anthony 16 years later and talked with him and his family, I got back together with them, and I saw him, and I realized that the story I was telling myself wasn't the whole story. Yes, he had a bad outcome. Yes, he was neurologically not the same kid he was before, but he was still with his family. His family was still intact, and his family loved him for who he was, and he's still a part of that family. And in one day, the worst patient and complication of my career turned out to be the best patient of my career. And I think if I hadn't abandoned my post and I hadn't leaned into it, ultimately, it would have bugged me for my whole life. So those are the two lessons I would pass on to the younger uh, students, but not only just doctors, but people too. Lean into it, and and don't abandon your post. Be part of it, and it will work itself out. It truly will.
And I also think for me, what's helped is talking to other neurosurgeons because no matter who your significant other, your friends, no matter what they do, the only person who will actually understand you is another neurosurgeon. Another doctor will not understand. There's something very different about neurosurgery when you make a decision and you literally make one move and that person is changed for life. And that doesn't exist in other professions. So for me, what's helped is if I have a complication, talking to other neurosurgeons, getting their perspective because they understand. An internal medicine doctor, a cardiologist, a pediatrician, they may say they understand, they do not. They have not been through that. There's something very special and unique about neurosurgery that the complications are catastrophic, instant, and a direct result of your decision making. And so that's worked for me is talking to other neurosurgeons because, quite frankly, no one else on the planet Earth actually understands what you're going through. Um,
Two
but you
points
talk
about
about
that. Yep.
challenges in your book, you talk about complications. How do you, and you've done an amazing job with this, it seems, internalize failures and turn them into growth opportunities?
Yeah, and I think it leads right from your last question is don't go it alone. The aloneness feeling is when you don't when you haven't shared it with another neurosurgeon. I have on my phone literally in the last 2 days already spoken to two of my former residents that I bounced a case off of or something that was going on. It's one of those things where it's like a baseball team. We're chattering all the time. One's in Chicago, one's in Boston, and I continually talk with those people. So it's the aloneness is where you lead into dysfunction. Um, and then as far as the complications, I think there's a you can take responsibility for a complication and not blame yourself and not feel shame or feel at fault. And that's challenging. We're taught at a young age, who is responsible for this, and it's a shameful, scary thing when your parents said that to you. We are responsible for our complications. That is the business we've chosen, and that's something that you sign up for on the day you start neurosurgery. And it's not your fault. You're doing the best you can. It's a challenging environment. It's an unfriendly environment. There's no shame in it. You've trained for it. You've done everything you can, and you know you can do everything perfectly, and terrible things can still happen. And that's not just in neurosurgery. That's in life too. We've all had an experience where we've done everything right, everything by the book, and something terribly sad happens. It's part of life. And, I talk about this in my talk about the agony and the ecstasy of neurosurgery. And that is, you can't have ecstasy without agony. It's a two-sided coin. It's the law of opposites. You don't have lightness without darkness. And you can't have great triumphs without great sadness. It comes with it. And it's a challenging thing to swallow, but the more you think about it, the more it's true. So one of the mantras I talk about is acceptance of the past, and basically focusing on understanding whatever it is, it happened and it led you to where you are now. Gratitude for the present, because we have this one moment right in front of us to be of service, to connect with another human being in a very intimate way, and responsibility for the future. We're responsible for our future. And I think if you can follow those, um, you're going to do the best you can, and that's all you can do. I loved your other interview with the shoe surgeon.
Oh, yeah.
He had a great definition of perfect. Perfect is what it is now. It's what it is now. it is what it is. It's not what it's not, and that's perfect.
And that's perfect. Exactly. And I think that's a great way to look at the world. And I think to your end, what I tell people who are considering neurosurgery, it's unforgiving. It's one of the least forgiving professions you could possibly do. Because when you make mistakes, not if, when, like we all do, the consequences are so drastic compared to other professions. And I think you have to be okay with that. No one's perfect. We're all going to have complications, and you got to live, you got to learn, and you got to move on, and you can't let it paralyze you. And that's something I still struggle with, and I think every neurosurgeon who has a heart struggles with that. Do you feel like now at this point in your career you've achieved cognitive dominance?
No way. I'm just a student, maybe an advanced student, but I still face the same struggles, the same, judgmentalness that I need to be aware of, the same experience of fear, the same experience of arrogance sometimes that I need to, put in the closet and try to dismantle. No way. But it's something it's a great north on your compass. It's a great true north to shoot for.
Final question, because I know you're really busy, but single piece of advice you would give a young kid who wants to become a neurosurgeon?
Go for it. It is the greatest experience I've ever had in my life. Like I said, it's agony and it's ecstasy. You can't have one without the other. If you want to live a life without lows, you're going to live a life without highs. It's some of the highest highs I've ever had, some of the lowest lows I've ever had, and and you need a very understanding spouse. So two pieces of advice: a very understanding spouse, because you bring it home with you. You have to. You can't compartmentalize what we do. I don't think it works. I think you have to be who you are in every instance, and so your family goes through this experience as well. So that's that. Those are the 2 points. It's I loved it. What an environment of excellence. What a challenging and rewarding experience. And there are some tough spots that you got to work through.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. Anyone who asks me about should they do neurosurgery, my answer is if it's your love, if it's your passion, absolutely. If you're doing it because it sounds cool or the money, which really has come down recently, but if you're doing it for any other reason other than you love this and there's no other profession that I would have ever considered, then you should do it. But if you don't love it, find something else because it is, like I said, unforgiving, grueling. It's not a 9 to 5 job. You don't leave work and just check out. No, you bring it home. It's part of who you are. So, like you said, it's amazing yet burdensome at the same time, and you have to love it. I would have chosen nothing else, and I couldn't be happier with my decision. It looks like you're the same.
100%. a hundred
Yeah.
percent. I love it.
No, it's an amazing field, but it is tough. And if for any of our listeners who haven't read your book, Mark, Cognitive Dominance, it was a real learning point for me to read that because it went over a lot of the things that I do on a daily basis, but just at a much more defined level. And I think having cognitive dominance is not only applicable to neurosurgery, like you say in your book. It's any person who wants to improve their performance in life.
I'm glad it was useful for you. Thank you.
All right, Mark. Well, you have a great day. Pleasure chatting with you. Thanks so
And you
much.
too. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Bye bye.